Welcome to another Grade 10 Life Science session. In today's lesson, we will be focusing on biodiversity on Earth and South Africa, the classification systems and the history of classification, as well as the taxonomic levels of classification. Now let us look at the definitions of some of these key concepts. Biodiversity refers to the variety of living organisms on Earth, which includes the species diversity, which is made up of different species of herbivores or carnivores or plants. Then we look at genetic diversity. This refers to the differences in the genes of one species. Example, there are many different types of dogs or dog species, and that is due to the genes, the variety of genes in a particular species. Then we look at the ecosystem diversity. And the ecosystem diversity is due to the 7 highly diverse biomes in our country, South Africa. We will later focus on some of the pictures that illustrate species diversity, genetic diversity, and ecosystem diversity. According to the IUCN, that is the International Union for Conservation, South Africa is ranked as the 3rd most diverse country in the world, although it's occupying just 1% of the Earth's surface. Let us now look at why is South Africa known as the 3rd most diverse country in the world. This is due to it being home to 23,500 plant species, 600 bird species, 2,220 fish species, 370 reptile species, and 80,000 insect species, as well as 250 mammal species out of the 2 million known species in the world. So therefore, our country is regarded as the 3rd most diverse country in the world because out of the 2 million known species of plants and animals, South Africa is home to at least 80,000 insect species, 370 reptile and amphibian species, 2,220 fish species. So that is a lot of species out of the 2 million species. Therefore, our country is the 3rd most diverse country in the world, and we have that evidence. We now look at some of the illustrations to show you species diversity, looking at the different species of herbivores. We're going to also look at different pictures to show you genetic diversity as well as ecosystem diversity. We now look at the rhino population, which is part of your herbivores, and you know that the rhino is the population that is poached, and therefore our diversity or the number of rhino population is decreasing as a result of poaching. And then we have our springbuck population, our buffalo population, the zebra population, and the giraffe population. And you can see the differences in the species of herbivores. Here is an illustration to show you that due to the differences in genes in the dog species, we have a wide variety of dogs, and that is due to the different genes of a population. Ecosystem diversity refers to the biotic, which is the plants and the flowers and the grasses, as well as the interdependence on the abiotic factors, and that is the water and the rocks and the soil. So an ecosystem diversity refers to an interaction of the abiotic and the biotic elements of an ecosystem. We now look at some other concepts which are very, very important in defining biodiversity. Let us look at some of the very important concepts which can be confusing, but we can differentiate between them in order for us to understand it a bit better. Indigenous species. What do we understand by indigenous species? These are species that occur naturally in a country or an area. They are species that occur naturally in a country or an area. Why is it that these species occur naturally in that area and no other area? It's because they are suited to living in that specific climatic conditions or biome. They are adapted to living in that specific climatic condition or biome. Let us now look at an example of an indigenous species. The African elephant is indigenous to Southern Africa, but not just South Africa, because it is found in many countries in Southern Africa and not South Africa alone. So please remember that the African elephant is indigenous to Southern Africa, but not just in our country, South Africa. Reason being, it is found in Southern Africa, like in Botswana, Namibia. You can find the African elephant and not just in our country, so it's indigenous to this country. What is the opposite of the word indigenous? Remember the word exotic. Exotic refers to plants or animals that come from another country into our country. So exotic plants are basically the alien plants. They have brought in to our country illegally, and they have now become exotic plants. An example of an exotic plant found in our country, but yet it's very beautiful, is the jacaranda tree found in Pretoria. The jacaranda is known for its purple flowers, which begin to bloom in June, July. And that tree is an exotic plant. We now look at another key concept called endemic species. Now, endemic differs from indigenous. Let us see how. Endemic plants or species, these are plants and animals found only in a specific habitat of a country. So it's not just a species found in the country, but in a specific habitat of the country and nowhere else in the country. Let us look at an example. Right, we're seeing the protea and the fynbos in the Western Cape. Right, you have the protea flower. You cannot find, the protea flower is found in South Africa, but not just any place in South Africa, not in just any area, but only in the Western Cape, and especially on the Table Mountain. As well as the fynbos, it's found in the Western Cape and nowhere else in Cape Town. Now, we also have biodiversity hotspots, and South Africa is regarded as having the 3 most important biodiversity hotspots, where they have a variety of endemic species. The Cape Floristic region is the hotspot of South Africa's biodiversity, and that's because of the large number of fynbos and proteas found only in the Western Cape. So to conclude that how would you differentiate between indigenous and endemic? Remember again, indigenous refers to plants or animals found in a particular country or an area and not in any other country. Endemic refers to plants or animals found in a particular habitat or niche in that country. And plants that are not endemic and are not indigenous to a country but brought from another country are referred to as exotic plants or animals. We now look at prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So our biodiversity of plants and animals, that means a wide variety of plants and animals, can be divided into two further categories, and these are prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Let us now look at the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotes are uni or multicellular organisms made up of cells that do not have a nuclear envelope or membrane. So now let's see. Prokaryotic organisms are organisms that do have a cell. However, the cell nucleus is primitive. Pro meaning primitive. That means that the nuclear material or the genetic material or the DNA is not surrounded by a nuclear membrane. So prokaryotic are unicellular or multicellular, and unicellular means one cell, multicellular means many cells. And the key focus of prokaryotic means it's having a primitive nucleus. Karyo means nucleus. And the most important thing is it does not have a nuclear envelope or a nuclear membrane. The genetic material in a prokaryotic cell is not bound in a nucleus. They also lack cell organelles such as the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, and mitochondria. So remember that prokaryotes are organisms that can be unicellular or they could be multicellular, but the main focus of prokaryote as they are divided into this category is because of one specific feature, and that is that the nuclear material does not have a nuclear membrane and there are no cell organelles in the cytoplasm. There are no Golgi body, no lysosomes, no endoplasmic reticulum, and no mitochondria. We see that the prokaryotes are divided into two main groups, and that is the archaebacteria, which is ancient bacteria, and the eubacteria, which is the true bacteria. Archae and ancient go together, and eu and true go together. So you find that we can take the prokaryotic cells and we can divide them into two further categories, and that is some of the prokaryotic cells are archae, that means they are ancient, and then they could be eu, which means they are true cells which have a true nucleus. We now look at a picture of a prokaryote. Here you can see an example of a bacterium. Bacteria belong to the kingdom prokaryote. Prokaryotes are organisms that have no nucleus and no cell organelles. The genetic material of the cell is not contained in a nuclear membrane. Prokaryote is actually a Greek word which means before the nucleus, a primitive nucleus. Let's look at the nuclear material here. You can see that the chromosomes or the chromatin material is not defined within a nuclear membrane, and there are no specific cell organelles within the cytoplasm. Therefore, this bacterium is regarded as a prokaryotic cell. The single bacterium here also tells you that it is unicellular and not multicellular. We now go on to looking at eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are multicellular, meaning many cells, made up of cells which are true. that possess a membrane-bound nucleus that holds the genetic material as well as membrane-bound cell organelles. The genetic material in a eukaryote is contained within a nucleus. What are eukaryotes? They are the plants, the animals, the fungi, and the protista. Your protista meaning the amoeba, your fungi, which is your bread mold and your mushrooms and your mildew, and all the different animals that you know of, and all the different plants that you know of. So the plants, animals, fungi, and protista are eukaryotic simply because they have cells that have a nucleus which is bound by a nuclear membrane. Let us have a look at a eukaryotic cell. Here is an example of an animal cell. It's eukaryotic. As you can see, they are definite cell organelles. Here we can see a mitochondria. We can see pieces of the endoplasmic reticulum. We can see a well-defined nucleus with a nucleolus as well as the chromosomes. And here is the outer layer called the nuclear membrane. Here is all your genetic material that is confined to the nucleus, bound by the nuclear membrane. And we can see a very big difference now between a eukaryotic cell and the previous one, the prokaryotic cell. So this cell is regarded as a eukaryotic cell. Let us now have a look at some of the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic, and we're going to see how we can tabulate these differences into a proper tabular or table form. Remember, in an exam, you are given marks for drawing off the table. Therefore, if you have to draw the differences between prokaryote and eukaryote, the first thing you need to do is put down the headings in your table. Draw a line in the center and make sure that the very same characteristics are being compared. Prokaryotes, the most important thing is, let's look at the size. Prokaryotes are small. Eukaryotes are large cells. As you can see, bacteria are microorganisms. They are small. Animals, like for example the squamous epithelium in the cheek of an animal, is a much larger cell than a bacterium which you cannot be seen with the naked eye. Most prokaryotes are unicellular, single-celled. But most of all prokaryotes mostly are multicellular. So prokaryotes could be uni or multicellular, but eukaryotes are often multicellular. The genetic material within a prokaryote is not confined to a nucleus or nuclear membrane. The genetic material in a eukaryote is bound by a nuclear membrane. The prokaryotes lack cell organelles, and these are the examples. They lack the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi body, the lysosome, and the mitochondria. And eukaryotes, because the cells are true cells, they have cell organelles in the cytoplasm, within the cytoplasm. Prokaryotes can be divided into eubacteria, true bacteria, like your penicillin bacteria, and archaebacteria, which are very, very primitive bacteria, like your stromatolites, which normally release the oxygen. So eubacteria are your true disease-causing bacteria. And the archaebacteria are your primitive bacteria, which is normally your blue-green bacteria that is found on the seabeds. We are now going to look at the classification schemes. Because our Earth has a great variety of plants and animals, in order for scientists to study these animals and to differentiate between one plant and an animal to the next, they have to put them into a classification system. In this way, we are able to differentiate one organism from the next depending on their features and characteristics. So a classification system is very, very necessary. In the very same way, we look at For example, if you happen to take the clothes into your cupboard, you need to sort them out into different categories. The cutlery in a kitchen, you need to sort them out into different categories in order for you to locate and find them easily. Let's look at the classification scheme. Due to the vast number of organisms that exist on Earth, scientists group them according to features and characteristics that they have in common. This is just like sorting out the cutlery in the kitchen or the clothes in your cupboard. We now take a break, and when we come back after the break, we're going to be looking at the classification schemes. Welcome back. We now look at the classification schemes and in particular the history of classification. Now this can be confusing, but if you put all the facts into a table, you will be able to memorize and understand it a bit better. Let us now look at the history of classification. Aristotle is a Greek philosopher. He classified living things into plants or animals according to their appearance. So now let us look at the first person. The first philosopher who brought about the classification system was Aristotle. Remember, he was a Greek philosopher, and he classified our wide biodiversity of plants and animals into two broad categories, plants and animals. So when you are looking at plants and animals, remember, we categorize them. The father who categorized biodiversity into plants and animals was Aristotle. Carolus Linnaeus. He was a Swedish scientist, and he introduced the binomial nomenclature system, which is a two-naming system of classification. He used the genus and the species naming system. Capital letter was used for genus and small letter for species. Example, Homo is a genus name, and here you can see the capital letter, and sapiens is a species name, and here you can see the small letter. He used this to classify modern humans as well, or he used it to classify the lion into Panthera leo and Panthera pardus for a leopard. We can see the word Panthera leo and Panthera pardus, and the common word in both these species was the word Panthera, which is the Homo species, meaning that the leopard and the leo or the lion are very common, or they have features that are common. Therefore, they belong to the same Homo species, the same Homo, and that is Panthera. Carolus Linnaeus further classified organisms into the 7 taxonomical levels, and that is the kingdom, the phylum, the class, the order, the family, the genus, and the species. I will give you a simple way of putting the taxonomical levels in a formatted fashion without you forgetting it. So we need to make a mnemonic of the 7 taxonomical levels in the correct order. Let us use a mnemonic for it. Right, the first one. For kingdom, we can use the word king. P, or phylum, we can say Philip. King Philip, castle, organizers, family, gatherings, specialities. So for king, it's kingdom. For phylum, or for Philip, we say phylum. Castle stands for class. Organizers is for order. Family is family. genus, gathering, and specialities. So let's see KPCOFGS. So if you know KPCOFGS, and you know, if I say King Philip's Castle organizes family gathering specialities, and you look at the first letter of those words, the K will stand for kingdom, the P for phylum, C for class, O for order, F for family, G for genus, and S for species. Now these key letters can be used as a mnemonic. King Philip's Castle organizes family gathering specialities. If you remember it that way, you will know the order of the 7 taxonomical levels. Let us see the example which Carolus Linnaeus has given us. He classified plants. He classified the mealy into the kingdom Plantae. The mealy plant belongs to the phylum Angiosperms, the reason being that the mealy plant is a flowering plant. It belongs to the class Monocotyledon because it has one seed. The order Cyperales because it's wind pollinated. Poaceae because it's a grass. Zea, or the genus Zea, because it is a leafy stalk. And it belongs to the species maize because it has kernels or little seeds onto the kernel. We therefore can see that all plants belong to the kingdom Plantae, and if they are flowering plants, they will belong to the phylum Angiosperms, and if they were cone-bearing, they will belong to the family, for example, Gymnosperms. Let us look at more examples of classification schemes using the 7 taxonomical levels. All 3 of the following animals, namely cats, lions, and humans, are in the class Mammalia, but their classification separates them because cats and lions are in the order Carnivora, whereas humans are primates. Let's look at the human classification. A human belongs to the kingdom animal, Animalia or animal. So the kingdom is Animalia. Phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Primate, family Hominidia, genus Homo, and species Sapien. Now if you look at the lion, lion belongs to an animal kingdom. It's a Chordata, it's a mammal, it's a carnivore, Felidae, Panthera, and Leo, whereas the cat is also an animal, Chordata, mammal, carnivore, Felidae, Felis, and Domesticus. Looking at these 3, we can see that humans, lions, and cats are all animals, so they have the same common kingdom. They are all having the phylum Chordate because they have a vertebral column. They all are classified as mammals because they have mammary glands. But when it comes to order, you find that the lion and cat are closely related because they belong to the order Carnivore. They catch and they kill their prey. Whereas man can cook food, he depends on maybe dead meat, but he does not catch and kill his prey. Therefore, he belongs to the order Primate. So with regards to the order, lions and cats are closely related because they share the same characteristic of being carnivorous. And humans will differ in that order because they are primates. They are not carnivorous. You look at the family as well. The family also distinguishes the human from the lion and the cat. The lion and the cat are more closely related because they have the same family name, Felidae. So the lions and cats, or we also say that the cat belongs to the lion family or the lion belongs to the cat family, and that is Felidae because they have similar features. A human being, on the other hand, belongs to a hominid or hominidae because hominids are actually bipedal. So we are bipedal, we stand upright, and therefore we are hominids. Whereas the cats and lions are quadrupedals, they actually walk on all four, and therefore they belong to Felidae, and they have cat-like features. Therefore, you see, if the family name is the same, they are closely related. But if the family name differs between two organisms, then they are not closely related. Let's look at genus. Humans are Homo species, or belong to the genus Homo, lion Panthera, and cat Felis. Here we can see that these three organisms, the human, the lion, and the cat, have three different genus names, which means there are other features which are characteristic to each one. They are unique to each one, and therefore the genus name differs amongst each one of them. Species. Homo, or the Homo species or man, is a sapien, the lion is a Leo, and the cat is a Domesticus. How does the species name differ amongst these three animals or these three vertebrates? Remember, the Homo or species name sapiens means modern man. So sapiens means a modern man with a larger brain capacity or larger cranium. Then you have the lion, which is called the Leo, and the Leo is because it catches and hunts its prey, and it's far more bigger than a cat. The cat belongs to the Felis or Domesticus because it can be kept within a home. So Domesticus means it is an animal that's kept in the home. It's a domestic animal kept in the home. Whereas a lion cannot be called Domesticus because it's not kept in the home. It is found in the wild, and therefore it is called Leo. Here are some important facts. Organism 2 and 3. Organism 2 and 3 are most closely related because they have the same family name. Organism 2 is a lion, and organism 3 is a common house cat, therefore it is Domesticus. Organism 1, which is the human, is related at a lower level, namely at the class, and therefore you find humans, lions, and cats are related to each other because all of them have mammary glands. We now look at some of the scientific names. Remember, when we say Homo sapien or Panthera leo or Panthera pardus, these are scientific names. Scientific names means they have a Homo name, Homo sapiens, that means they have a genus and a species name. So all scientific names have a genus and a species name. And these are scientific names brought about by Carolus Linnaeus. Remember, Carolus Linnaeus was the person who introduced the binomial nomenclature. Binomial means the two naming system, and that is the genus and the species name. Now, why is it that we need to use scientific names and not common names? Remember that common names are general. For example, we can talk of men as people, as humans, that is very, very general. But a scientific name, if we say Homo sapien, we know we are talking about a human being and not just any kind of an organism. Scientific names are taken from Greek or Latin, as these do not change. Common names can be confusing, as there can be more than one name for an organism. Example, man, human, people. Names also differ from one country to the next. Example, the cat is la chat in French and ikat in isiZulu. Therefore, if we use different names for the same organism, it can be very confusing. Names of organisms need to be standardized. Therefore, the binomial system or the scientific name of classification will refer to specific organisms so that it makes the life of scientists easier. They can study a particular organism and they know exactly what characteristics they are looking for depending on the taxonomical levels. We now look at the history of classification even further. Let us now see how are plants and animals divided into 5 broad kingdoms. Robert Whittaker introduced the 5 kingdoms of classification, and this was according to the modes of nutrition. Here we see the 5 kingdoms that was actually put into place by Robert Whittaker. We have at the bottom, or at the roots, the unicellular organism, which is your Monera. At the roots, at the base, your Monera. These are basically made up of microorganisms, that's your bacteria and your viruses. Then we have the Protista kingdom, which is basically your algae, your paramecium and your amoeba. Then you have your plants, which is all your flowering plants, seeded plants, cone-bearing plants. And here you have your animals and your fungi. So the 5 kingdom system is the Monera, Protista, fungi, animals and plants. So learners, remember that it was Robert Whittaker who classified further our living organisms into the 5 kingdoms, and that is plants, or that is the organisms can be divided into either plants, that is, can they make food on their own? Do they have a chloroplast? Yes, that means they are autotrophic, therefore they are plants. If they could not make food on their own and depended on another organism for its food, and if they could move, they were classified as under the kingdom Animalia. If they were amoeba and lived in water, that was Protista. And if they were bacteria, that was classified as Monera. And if they were not a bacteria, if they were not an animal, but if they grew on decaying organic matter, they were regarded as the fungi. We now look at another scientist or microbiologist who further classified, who further actually divided the class Monera. So they took the kingdom Monera. So we had 2 microbiologists that took the kingdom Monera and further divided it. This was Carl Woese and George Fox. They are microbiologists, meaning they study microorganisms. And they stated that the kingdom Monera, under which we have the bacteria and the viruses, that the kingdom Monera is divided into 3 domains. And that is the eubacteria, which was your true nucleus, the archaebacteria, and the eukaryotes. That means cells with the true nucleus, the primitive bacteria, and the eubacteria, which has a proper nucleus. Domains are therefore above the kingdoms in terms of hierarchy. Let us now look at the kingdom Monera. Kingdom Monera are simple one-celled organisms which are unicellular. They are prokaryotic. They can be autotrophic or heterotrophic, and this means they can make their own food, if they have a chloroplast, or they can be heterotrophic. It means that they depend on other organisms. Reproduction is by simple mitosis, also called binary fission. Example, viruses and bacteria. So let's look at it again. That the Monera kingdom has the characteristics of being unicellular, prokaryotic means primitive nucleus. They could have a chloroplast, which means they can make food on their own. Certain bacteria can make food on their own. Or they can be parasitic or saprophytic, means they depend on other organisms to get their food. They can reproduce by simple mitosis, and examples or pictures of a Monera would be, for example, the virus, the AIDS virus, which is classified under the kingdom Monera, or your different bacteria, which is classified under the kingdom Monera. And here you have several bacteria that are producing rapidly by binary fission, and this one shows you how simple mitosis occurs in this bacteria, and very rapidly from one cell you're getting two. Then you have your protista. Remember, your protista is your amoeba, which is one single cell. It has a true nucleus, and the spirogyra, which is, and your seaweeds, that is your algae, are also protista. They are autotrophic, and they also have they're autotrophic, which means they can make food on their own. Okay. Now, which one here is the heterotrophic? Let's look at protista. Now, we have two modes of nutrition under protista. The heterotroph is the amoeba, because it's a single-celled organism which depends on food by catching other organisms. So amoeba can actually behave like predators, whereby they engulf other particles or other water beetles. So heterotrophic means an amoeba depends on other organisms for its food, whereas your protista, and that is your algae, has a chloroplast. Now the spirogyra is an algae, and this algae has a chloroplast which can make its own food. So protista is that they are single-celled. That means all protista are either unicellular, like the amoeba, or they could be multicellular, like the spirogyra. So kingdom protista could be unicellular or multicellular. They are true cells, and the mode of nutrition could be autotrophic or heterotrophic. If it's an amoeba, it's heterotrophic. If it's an algae or a seaweed or a spirogyra, it is autotrophic. And these are the most important characteristics of protista. We now go on to kingdom plantae. What are some of the features of plantae? Remember, they belong to the domain eukaryotes, because all plant cells have a true nucleus with a proper nuclear membrane. Some of the features of plantae are: they are eukaryotes, they are complex and multicellular, and they have a cell wall made up of cellulose. Now remember, cellulose is a type of carbohydrate that forms the structural component of cell walls. So cellulose is found in all plant cells. Autotrophs. All plants are able to make their own food. By a process called photosynthesis. So therefore, if plants are able to make their own food, or if an organism can make their own food, that's their mode of nutrition, they are regarded as autotrophs, and autotrophs automatically belong to the kingdom plantae. They have a chlorophyll, they produce nutrition via photosynthesis, they can reproduce asexually by means of spores. If we look closely at this, at the word asexual, asexual simply means an organism producing another, but not by means of gametes. Sperm and egg cells are not involved in coming together to produce another organism. So plants can reproduce asexually by means of spores or vegetative reproduction. Another name for asexual reproduction is vegetative reproduction. So plants can reproduce by means of spores. Sexually by means of gametes. Now we have our flowering plants, and the flowering plants have the male and the female parts, the pistil, the female part of the flower, the stamen with the anther and the stigma and the filament, the anther producing the pollen grains which contain the male gamete, and the pistil which has the ovary containing the female ovule. And because we have gametes like the male gamete and the female gamete, it means when these come together during fertilization, they will produce a seed which will produce another plant. Therefore, plants can actually reproduce asexually, that means vegetatively without gametes, or they can reproduce sexually with gametes. Example of plants are mosses, that is your fine carpet-like structures found near the tap or in a shaded place near the building. These are your mosses. Your ferns, which belong to the phylum Pteridophyta, your conifers, which are your cone-bearing plants, the fynbos that we spoke about earlier, which is found in Cape Town, on the Western Cape, on the Table Mountain, and your angiosperms are the ones that belong to the phylum. Angiosperms are flowering plants, and this is a phylum of the plants because they produce flowers. So angiosperms produce flowers. So all flowering plants belong to the phylum Angiosperms. And here we can see our Protea, which is actually endemic to the Western Cape. There you can see, further there you can see the fynbos, which is also endemic to the Western Cape. And all the fynbos and the Protea, the mosses, the ferns, and other flowering plants, together with the fine moss-like structures near the tap, belong to the kingdom Plantae. Here's it. And we look at, for example, the kingdom Animalia. All animals are eukaryote because they have a true nucleus, they are complex, they are able to make their own food, and they can reproduce sexually as well as asexually. We now go on to the kingdom Fungi. What are some of the characteristics of fungi? And we're going to look at some pictures of fungi as well. Remember that fungi are eukaryotes. Remember, that is the domain, eukaryotes. They have a true nucleus. They are very complex because they have more than one cell. Therefore, they are multicellular. They have cell walls of chitin. So fungi have cell walls made up of chitin. Fungi are also heterotrophic because they cannot make food on their own. So fungi are heterotrophs because they cannot make food on their own. And remember that heterotrophic nutrition can be either saprophytic or parasitic. Saprophytic means that fungi grow on dead or organic or decaying matter, like your bread mold growing on stale bread. Or the fungi could be parasitic. For example, the athlete's foot, which is the fungus found growing on the feet of humans, which eats away the skin. Therefore, it's parasitic, it's harming the living tissue. Or the ringworm, which is parasitic, which is also found on the skin or normally on the face of man. So the athlete's foot fungus and the ringworm fungus are parasitic. They have a parasitic mode of nutrition, and because they're gaining their food from man's skin, and these fungi cannot make food on their own, they fall under the heterotrophic mode of nutrition. And the bread mold is alive, but it is feeding on the starch found in bread, and the bread could be decaying organic matter, and therefore that kind of a fungus has a saprophytic nutrition. Fungi also reproduce sexually and asexually by means of spores. Normally when fungi reproduce sexually, it's normally under unfavorable conditions. When fungi reproduce asexually by means of spores, it's normally under favorable conditions. Example of fungi are the mushrooms, the yeast, and the bread. Several of these fungi have economic importance. For example, without yeast, we will not be able to make bread and beer. Right. We also have the mushrooms, which are important. They are edible, they are sold in supermarkets, and therefore mushrooms are very important for human use. We use them as food. We use yeast in the baking of bread and in the making of beer or in breweries. And then you have your other fungi which can be harmful, and that is the mildew. So all the black patches that you see in the bathroom or in a moist place between the tile, that is actually mildew. Here is an example of a fungus or the bread mold in a microscope. This fungus has been magnified, and you can see the cell walls made up of chitin and all the little hyphae or threads, and they are multicellular. And all the little dots here that you see are the spores, which can be used for asexual reproduction. We will now take a break, and when we come back, we will look at some of the questions dealing on biodiversity and classification. Welcome back. We are now going to look at some of the questions that can be asked on biodiversity and classification. Let's look at question 1. These are multiple choice questions where you have 4 alternatives. Now we need to know, how do we actually get to the correct answer? Which is the scientific name of an organism? Remember, to get a scientific name, it has to satisfy the 2 naming system. It must have a genus and it must have a species name. The genus in a capital and the species in a small letter. This brings us to look at this. The first alternative cannot be correct because it just has one name in a capital letter. This one just has one name in a small letter, so that is out. We cannot say all of these are correct, so that eliminates D, leaving us with C because it has a genus and a species name. So Felidae domesticus, which is actually your cat, is the correct scientific name of an organism. Let's look at number 1.2. Which scientist? They want to know the scientist that is responsible for classifying organisms into plants and animals. So the scientists, plants and animals, that's your keywords. Now we know that Robert Whittaker actually brought about the 5 kingdom system. So he is out. Then we know that Carolus Linnaeus brought about the binomial system. And Carl Wusser was the microbiologist who divided Monera into your 3 domains, which leaves us with Aristotle being the father of classification, and he is the person who divided the organisms into plants and animals. So the scientist that classified organisms into plants and animals was actually Aristotle. Which taxonomical level is the highest in terms of the classification scheme? Now we know that genus is almost the last part of classification before the species. We said that domains come before the kingdom. So if domains come before the kingdom, it is actually the domain that is at the top hierarchical level of the classification scheme. So it is the domain and then the kingdom. So in this case, the answer would be domain. We now look at 1.4. Which kingdom is mismatched? Let us now look at the parts that are matched. We know that arthropods are locusts and humans, and they do belong to Animalia. So that is correct. Flowers and mosses are plants, so they automatically do belong to Plantae. Algae, it is the algae and the amoeba that belong to Protista. So as long as algae is there or amoeba is there and Protista, it means that these two do belong to Protista. Even though it's only algae, algae does belong to the kingdom Protista. Now remember, fungi have a proper nucleus. So fungi are actually not prokaryotic because it is the bacteria that are prokaryotic. Fungi are actually eukaryotes. They belong to the kingdom Eukaryotes. So fungi cannot be a prokaryote. And because this is mismatched, so all these are correct, but this is the one that's mismatched, and therefore that is the correct answer. So remember that this mismatch is incorrect, and therefore, according to the question, the one that's mismatched will be A. So your answer will be A. Please do not write down the entire answer, but only the letter of the correct answer. Let's look at 1.5. One major difference between a eukaryote and a prokaryote is that they have a cell wall. Even eukaryotes and prokaryotes have a cell wall, so that one's out. They have nuclear material. All organisms have a nuclear material. They are all living, but the presence or absence of a nuclear membrane is the one that determines whether an organism is eukaryotic or prokaryotic. Remember, prokaryotic means primitive nucleus. Eukaryotic means a true nucleus with a nuclear membrane. Pro means primitive without a nuclear membrane. That's your bacteria. And therefore, the presence or absence of a nuclear membrane gives you the difference between these two living organisms. We are now done with the 5 multiple choice. We are now going to questions which need a longer answer and more application. Let's look at question 2. Why is South Africa regarded as a biodiversity hotspot? Now let us analyze, why is it regarded as a biodiversity hotspot? Remember, we said that South Africa is regarded as the 3rd most diverse country in the world, and that's because it has 3 biodiversity hotspots. Right, that is, it's regarded as a biodiversity hotspot because it has 3 hotspots. And that is your Cape Floristic region, that is in the Western Cape. Then you have your Maputo, Pondoland, Albany, and you have the succulent Karoo. Now these 3, the Cape Floristic region, the Maputo, Pondoland, Albany, and the succulent Karoo, these 3 hotspots are 3 out of the 25 biodiversity hotspots in the world. Out of the 25 biodiversity hotspots in the world, South Africa has these 3, and therefore South Africa is regarded as a biodiversity hotspot. Let's look at question 2.2. State the significance of classification system of naming organisms. State the significance, that means the importance of the classification system of naming organisms. Now we're going to analyze why must there be a classification system? And let's look at it. Firstly, it is for studying organisms, studying by the scientists. So we need to classify so that studying by scientists can be made easier. Number 2, we can actually check closely related species. So by looking at the scientific names, we are able to see whether species are closely related or not. And then we are able to see some of the common and the different characteristic features of individual species. So the significance of classifying is, firstly, we need to classify organisms, so studying by scientists become easier. We are able to see whether organisms are closely related or not, and we are able to see the different and the common characteristic features of individual species. And there you have the significance of the naming system of organisms. We now go to question 3. Right, we go to 3.1. Explain the binomial system of naming organisms. Now to explain it, because it's an explanation and not a single word, we have to say that it was Carolus Linnaeus who introduced the binomial system. The binomial system. It is the two naming system. It is a two naming system with a genus in a capital letter and a species in a small letter. And that tells you the binomial system. So you're introducing who introduced the binomial system and what exactly is the binomial system. And that is the genus and the species name, as well as how to recognize the genus name with a capital letter and you recognize the species name with a small letter. And then you can also give them an example. Example, Panthera leo, which is actually a lion, and this is a scientific name. You can also state that the binomial system gives organisms a scientific name which is standardized irrespective of country. So remember, it is because of Carolus Linnaeus that organisms are categorized having scientific names. So no matter what country that you go to, a lion is a Panthera leo. A cat is a Felidae domesticus. Therefore, scientific names would not change because scientific names, remember, are derived from Latin, and Latin does not change. That language remains constant, and therefore it's the most suitable names to use for the genus and the species. We are now going to look at the next question. Question 3.2. What are the 7 obligatory classification categories? Remember, I told you that you need to write down a mnemonic to help you remember the order and the sequence of the 7 taxonomical levels. But when you do that, you write down the first letter of your mnemonic. So you say King Philip Castle organizes family gatherings, specialities. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. King Philip's Castle organizes family gathering specialities or specials. K stands for your kingdom. P stands for your phylum. C is your class. O is your order. F is your family, G is your genus, and S is your species. We have now come to an end on the section on biodiversity and classification. Remember, the most important thing in the section for you to know for the exams are the scientists that have been involved in introducing the classification system. And that was Aristotle, who divided organisms into plants and animals, Robert Whittaker, who brought about the 5-kingdom system, Carolus Linnaeus, who actually introduced the binomial system, or the genus and the species name, as well as the 7 taxonomical levels. That's the most important scientists for you to know, as well as Carl Woese and George Fox, who divided all 5 kingdoms into the 3 domains. Then you need to also focus on the actual biological terminology like biodiversity, endemic, indigenous, biotic factors, abiotic, and the differences between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. What you can do is make a concept mapping of these terms and put in little like a spider web kind of a structure, all the most important terminology that rotates around a specific theme or term. In this way, you are able to put all the notes into one little concept map, which helps as a study skill. For next time, we will be looking at the next session of Life Science in grade 10. I hope this section is going to be fruitful to you and is going to benefit you. Remember that reading and listening and writing is one of the most important successes to actually achieving good marks in the exam.